Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 1 to 5 player game, Finspan, designed by David Gordon and Michael O'Connell, with development by Elizabeth Hargrave, and published by Stonemaier Games, who helped sponsor this video. Wondrous creatures live in our seas and oceans, and you're on a quest to explore and observe all the aquatic life you can find. Based on the original Wingspan, designed by Elizabeth Hargrave, here you'll be charting a new course down into the depths. So, join me at the table and let's learn how to play. To set up, put this achievement board in the center of the play area with the A side face up if you have any new players at the table. I'll explain this B side and the tiles that are used with it at the end of this video, but for now, return these to the box and add this weak token to the space here. Nearby, create a supply of these double-sided tokens which show an egg on one side and a young fish, referred to in the game as a young, on the other. Also create a supply of these school of fish tokens referred to as school tokens in the game. Next, find the 125 fish cards with this back and shuffle them into a face-down deck within reach of the players. Each person now collects one of these ocean boards and a player aid. We'll assume we have 2 players in this video, returning any extras back to the box. From the supply, each person collects 3 of these tokens. Flip 2 of them to their egg side and add them to the related spaces for them showing on your board here and here. Then add the 3rd token with its young side face up into this spot for it here. Now find and shuffle the 10 cards with this light blue back, dealing 2 of them to each player, returning any leftovers back to the box. The cards you're dealt, you'll leave face up to the left side of your ocean board. Then each player is dealt 3 cards from the central deck of fish cards, and these are also kept face up by your board. Even though you won't hold these in your hand, cards you have here are known as your hand of cards and are always publicly visible to all the players. Each person now collects 6 of these diver pieces in their chosen color, and then one person is randomly picked to be the first player, gaining this first player token. And that's the setup. In Finspan, you'll be playing cards to your ocean board, creating fish eggs and hatching them, forming schools of fish and sending divers into the depths to explore, all in an effort to earn the most points by the end of the game. Now, before getting into how the game is played, I think it would be helpful to take a tour of the ocean boards. These have a variety of spaces where cards can be placed during the game and are organized into various regions. These 9 spaces are grouped together in what is known as the sunlight zone, represented by this symbol. The 3 spaces here make up the twilight zone, represented by this symbol, and here we have the midnight zone symbol, representing these 6 spaces. Each column of the board also represents a unique dive site, represented by the flipper symbols that we see here, and a matching band of color that runs down their right sides. So we have a blue, purple, and green dive site. The spaces of the very top row also show this symbol, which represents an estuary where salt water and fresh water meet. And the very bottom row spaces show this symbol, representing an area known as deep water. We'll see how these various spaces and zones affect gameplay soon. Speaking of which, the game is played over 4 rounds known as weeks, and each week is divided into a series of turns, starting with the first player and then going clockwise around and around the table. And on your turn, you'll either play a card or dive. Let's start by seeing how you play a card. Here you first move one of the available divers from beside your board to this gray box in the upper left-hand corner beside what is known as the play-a-fish symbol. Your player aid will remind you of how every symbol in the game works, but we'll also go through these together during this video. When you're playing a fish card, it must come from one of the face-up ones here on the left side of your board, which you'll remember represent your hand of cards. To play a fish, you must pay its costs, which will be shown in its top left-hand corner. These will be a combination of 1 or more symbols, which again are described on your player aid, but we'll go through them together. For each blue rectangle you see as a cost, you must choose one card from your hand to discard. So, to play this fish we were looking at, we'd have to pick two other fish in our hand to remove. Maybe we'd pick these two. They'll go to your personal discard pile, which you'll keep on the right side of your board, rotated sideways to further ensure you know which fish make up your hand and which you've discarded. The cards in each person's discard pile are considered public information, and their order doesn't matter. Once you've paid the cost of a fish, you then check this area to see which zone of the board it can be placed in. The symbols you find here will match one or more of the symbols representing the three different zones of the board. In this case, the fish must be placed in the twilight or midnight zones, but which column it goes into doesn't matter. Notice each player's board begins with 3 fish printed on it. These are known as forage fish. And when adding a new fish to your board, you can cover a fish within a valid zone as long as the size of the fish you're playing, shown here in its bottom left-hand corner, is longer than the fish you're covering up. This is known as consuming the fish underneath. So I could place this fish in any of these spaces, including these, since the fish I'm playing is larger than the ones here and here. Anytime you add a fish to a space containing any number of tokens, move them to the top of the new card. When playing fish later, I can also cover previous cards I had played, again, as long as the fish going on top is larger than the topmost fish under it. Some fish will show this symbol in its cost. If so, it means that fish must consume a smaller fish when it's placed on your board. So we couldn't add it to this empty space. It would have to go into a space of its listed zones that contains a smaller fish that it can consume, like the one here. Sometimes a cost will show one or more eggs, like we see here. This means you must return that number of eggs from anywhere on your board back to the general supply. So I could remove these two and then place this fish into any valid space of its indicated zone. This striped marlin shows a young symbol in its cost. This means you must have one of these tokens anywhere on your board to return to the general supply. We have one here, so we could pay it to play this fish. This whale shark has what is known as the school symbol in its cost. We don't have one of these on our board currently, so we couldn't play this fish, but they're represented by this token. And if we had one, we could return it to the supply to cover its costs. Just be aware, when you're paying egg, young, or school token costs, they can come from anywhere on your board. They don't have to come from a space related to the zone that the new fish is going into, and the new fish doesn't have to go into a space where one of those tokens came from. With that, we've covered all the possible costs you might encounter, and many fish will show some combination of them. So here we would need to move one card from our hand to our discard pile and return one egg token from our board back to the supply. Then we'd place our fish into any space of the related zone it shows here, even covering a previously placed fish, as long as the new one is larger than the one we're covering up. However, there is one other placement rule to consider. Some fish will show a banner down their right side in one of 3 different colors: blue, purple, or green. Each color matches one of the 3 dive sites or columns, and that means they must be added to one of those related spaces. So if I was playing this Emperor Red Snapper, then after paying its costs, it would have to go into one of these spaces showing a matching purple banner in the sunlight zone. And that's how you play a fish. You move a diver to this gray area here at the top of your board and pay the cost of a fish in your hand, adding it to a valid space based on any restrictions it might have. After adding a new fish to your board, check this area of its card. Many will have a when played effect, showing a combination of symbols you resolve once immediately after the fish is added to your ocean board. Several of these symbols we have seen before, but instead of being a cost, they are now considered a benefit and are resolved differently. For example, when we see these blue rectangle symbols now as a benefit, it means we draw that many fish cards from the deck, adding them to our hand, so 3 in this case. And again, cards in your hand always go face up on the left side of your board. This fish also has a when played symbol we haven't seen yet. For each of these on a when played benefit, you go through your discard pile and pick any one of the cards there to return to your hand. If you would ever need to collect fish from your discard pile and you don't have any there, draw from the top of the fish deck instead. For example, with this effect, I would gain any 3 cards from my discard, but if I only had 1, I'd collect it, and then draw the remaining 2 from the top of the deck. On this fish, we see egg symbols as a when played benefit. For each, collect an egg token from the supply and add it to any fish on your board that doesn't already have one, which could include a pre-printed forage fish or even the one that provided the effect. Just be aware, an egg must be added to a space with a fish. It can't be added to an empty space. And each fish can only have, at most, 1 egg token at a time. That said, they can be put on a fish with a school token or any number of young tokens. And we'll see how these tokens get added later. Sometimes you'll see a when played benefit with an arrow pointing to a type of location. For example, this means you add an egg token to each fish you have in the purple column that doesn't already have an egg token. So in a case where we had just played this card, if we assume that these are all the fish in the purple column, then when resolving this effect, we'd add an egg here and then 1 here as well, but not to this fish since it already has an egg. The when played effect on this fish is similar, but it shows a new type of symbol here. As we know, every fish has a size indicated by the number in this corner, but each size is grouped into 3 general categories represented by 3 different possible tail icons in this area. For example, this is the symbol for a large fish. Then here we see the symbol for a medium fish, and finally we have the symbol for what is known as a small fish. So this effect means we'd place an egg token on every medium-sized fish on our ocean board that doesn't already have one. Sometimes a when played effect will show this symbol, meaning that every player at the table gains the benefits shown. But each player can choose individually whether they want to resolve that benefit or not. In this case, each player can add an egg token to every small fish on their board that doesn't already have one. It's worth pointing out, benefits are always optional. I can resolve or ignore any of them that I'm owed, and when other players could gain benefits from cards I play, they can also choose to gain them or not, no matter what choices I make. All right, moving on. When you see this benefit, it means for each of these symbols, you may hatch one of your eggs. To do this, you flip any egg you have to its young side. And it's worth pointing out, you can resolve benefits in any order. So let's assume for a moment we hadn't resolved any of these effects yet, and we wanted to add an egg here. Well, we know we can't use this top effect to add an egg to this fish because it already has one. So maybe we'd skip down and use this ability to hatch the egg here first, and then use an egg effect to add a token here, and then possibly use this ability to hatch this egg, and maybe resolve our remaining egg symbol by placing a token here. Why you might want to put certain tokens on certain locations will make more sense as we learn more of the rules. Okay, earlier we saw this symbol as a cost, but when resolved as a benefit, each one lets you add a young token to any space of your board. Unlike eggs, these can be added to empty spaces, and you can have more than one in the same space. So I could add these to 2 different spaces or both to the same one. However, anytime you would have 3 young in the same space, pause and return them to the supply, replacing them with one of these school tokens. As we'll see, these are worth several points at the end of the game. However, you can never have more than 1 school token in the same space, so if I later had 3 or more young tokens in this space, they would not change into a school token because, again, you can only have 1 school token per space. This is where an effect like we see here can help. When resolving this, you may move any one young or school token you have any number of spaces in a straight line, not including diagonally. As we mentioned earlier, we have 3 young tokens here that can't turn into a school token because there's already one in this space. But if we used this effect to move this school token, let's say, over to here, we would then pause and immediately replace these 3 young tokens with a school token now that there's room here for it. Just be aware, when using this ability, you can never move a school token onto or through a space already containing a school token. When moving young tokens with this effect, they can move onto or through any types of spaces, but as soon as one enters a space where 3 young are together and a school could be created, they must stop and are immediately replaced with a school token. This fish has a benefit with the same type of symbol we saw here for playing a fish card. That means after using a diver to play this fish, paying its cost and placing it into a valid space on our board, we would then immediately resolve this effect, which allows us to play another fish from our hand without using a diver. But this fish must be one that can be placed into a sunlight space, like for example the one we have here. So as an example, if on our turn we were to play this card by using a diver and paying its costs, after adding it to the board, we would then be able to play another fish that can go into a sunlit space, and perhaps we would choose this one. But just keep in mind, you still have to pay that fish's costs, and then you would resolve any of its when played effects after, as usual. Before moving on, I want to point out that some fish will have 1 or more symbols beside their name, and these are known as tags. You'll also find these listed in this area of your player aid. These are important because some effects refer to tags like this. Here you get to add an egg to any fish on your board that has this predator tag, which includes this fish itself. Here we have a fish with 2 of these symbols. This is known as an uber predator, and it would gain an egg from this effect as well. But these still only gain 1 egg from this type of effect, even though it shows 2 predator symbols. The same is true for these 2 tags. A fish with 2 of these symbols is also affected by benefits that target a single one of these symbols. And with that, we've covered all of the when played benefits you might encounter. So remember, to play a card on your turn, you move one of your divers to this area and then pay the cost of the card, moving it to a valid space of your board and resolving any when played benefits it may have. Some cards have other types of benefits, but those we'll learn about later. I should mention, in the unlikely event that the shared fish draw deck is ever emptied, you then shuffle together each player's personal discard piles into a new face-down draw deck. All right, so we've seen that on your turn you can play a card. But instead, you may use your turn to dive. And to illustrate this, I'll create some custom examples on my board like you might see later in the game. To dive, you move one of your divers from beside your board to the top of any one of these 3 columns, known as dive sites. At the very top, you'll find a dive site bonus related to the sunlight zone. This represents the benefit you'll now gain if you have at least 1 fish within that zone and column. For example, if I was diving here, I would not get this bonus because I don't have any fish in the zone directly under it. If I dove here, I'd gain this bonus since I have a fish within the sunlight zone of its column. Pre-printed fish count as well, so if I dove here, I'd gain this benefit for the fish in this area. We've seen these benefits before, and when resolved, they can apply to any valid space. They don't just affect the column where you're diving. But let's assume for this example, we decided to dive here. As we know, this benefit means we'd gain a card from the top of the deck and add it to our hand. After resolving this benefit, your diver then moves straight down, space by space, stopping if it reaches a fish with an if-activated effect. These will have a brown background like this. When your diver arrives at one of these, you resolve the related benefit it shows. You'll remember this symbol means you move any 1 card from your discard pile back to your hand. On this if-activated effect, we see a symbol we had resolved earlier as a cost, but here it's a benefit. When resolving this effect now, you may choose to have this fish consume a shorter fish in your hand, placing it underneath. This fish is 30 centimeters, so we could put this 12 centimeter fish under it.
This consumed fish is now considered a blank card, which will be worth exactly 1 point at the end of the game, as we'll see later. Just remember, benefits are always optional, so we don't have to resolve this effect if we don't want to. Also be aware, you ignore any effects showing on any fish that are covered by other fish. So, as a reminder, you'll be moving your diver down space by space within a column, stopping at each if-activated effect you find there. And at the top of each zone, you'll find a benefit that you can resolve as long as you have at least one fish in the related zone of that column. We do have a fish here, so we'd resolve this, gaining another card, and then we'd continue moving down, stopping at the top of this zone. We have a fish within the column of this zone, so we know that means we'll gain this benefit. But then, whether you've gained a benefit here or not, you will continue to move your diver down, and eventually, you will always reach this bottommost space. When you get to this area, if there are no divers in the white space to the right, you move your diver there and gain that benefit. The next time we dive in this column and reach the bottom, we don't gain that benefit again. Instead, our diver just stays within this gray space.
And that's how diving works. So on your turn, you'll either use a diver to play a card or to dive down one of your dive sites. Either way, after, the next player in clockwise order takes their turn, and around the table you'll go until each player has used all of their divers. Then it's time to resolve the end of the week. If this is the end of the first week, you'll come to this space of the achievement board and resolve the scoring effect it shows here. This is the symbol for points, so you earn 1 point for every egg and young token currently on your ocean board. Each player records the points they earned in this space under their name on one of the included score sheets. Then you move this token to the next week. Each player now takes back all of their divers, but otherwise leaves their boards as they are, and then the person holding the first player token passes it clockwise, where that player will now take the first turn of the next week of the game. At the end of that week, you'll score 2 points for every row of your ocean board with 3 fish, recording those points on your score sheet and following the steps here to take back your divers and pass the first player token, moving the marker here. At the end of the third week, each player earns 2 points for every school token on their board, and then follows these steps and plays the fourth week. When the fourth week ends, as you're reminded here, you activate any game end abilities showing on the fish in your ocean. These will have a yellow background like we see here. For example, this allows us to add an egg to each fish along the top row of our board that doesn't already have one. After players have resolved all their game end abilities, they proceed to final scoring following these steps, starting with scoring any game end points. These will also come from fish with a yellow background benefit here, but they'll show a point symbol icon. In this case, you'll score 6 points if this fish has exactly 2 young tokens on it. Having other types of tokens on it doesn't stop you from scoring these points, as long as it contains exactly 2 young tokens like we see here. Next, score the points showing in this area of the topmost fish card in each space of your board. So as an example, this would earn me 6 points and this would earn me 3. You then earn 1 point for every egg and young token found anywhere on your ocean board, and each school token you have instead earns you 6 points. You also earn 1 point for every fish that was consumed, so here you'd earn 2 points. And you include any covered fish that are printed on the board, so this would give us another point. Add each of these points to their related spaces of the score sheet, and then total all of them here. And the player with the most points wins. In the case of a tie, the tied player with the most fish cards still in their hand wins. And if there's still a tie, the tied players share the victory. Now I should mention, if you have experienced players, you can change the setup for future games.
Do this by placing the achievement board with its B side face up, and then sort these tokens into groups based on the number of lines shown along their sides here. You'll then randomly assign a token with a random side face up from each pile into the matching spaces for them on this board based on the number of lines the space shows. This will give you variety in the scoring goals each time you play. Also, you'll find a new step to resolve during the end of the week. It says here that the player or players who received the most points from a week's achievement tile also scores an additional 3 points. So if 2 players tied for earning the most points from this goal, they would each gain the extra 3 points. Otherwise, the rest of the game is played the same way. You'll also find rules and components for solo play, but those I'll leave for you to discover on your own.
Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Finspan. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.